Hollywood keeps selling you fantasy while veterans are screaming that it's all fake. These aren't just bad movies. They're disrespectful lies about what actually happened in combat. From glorified nonsense to laughably inaccurate battle scenes, we're counting down 12 films that made actual soldiers cringe so hard they walked out of theaters. Did you know one movie got the basic tactics of WWD so wrong that a retired general publicly called it propaganda? These are the films vets wish never existed. Number 1. Pearl Harbor. 2001. Michael Bay's 3-hour disaster didn't just get the history wrong, it got the respect wrong. Veterans watched this movie and felt like their sacrifice became a prop for romance subplots and explosions that looked nothing like the actual December 7th attack. The film dedicates more screen time to the love triangle between Josh Hartnett, Kate Beckinsale, and Ben Affleck than to the actual bombing that killed 1,177 sailors on the USS Arizona alone. Real Pearl Harbor survivors walked out halfway through, furious that Bay turned their trauma into melodrama with a pop soundtrack blaring underneath. The battle sequences looked like video game cutscenes rather than historical recreation. Critics praised the technical effects while veterans pointed out that literally every tactic shown was wrong. The dialogue was stilted, the acting felt phoned in, and the emotional core was completely absent because the filmmakers cared more about romance than realism. One Navy veteran said the film was insulting to everyone who actually died there. Box office success made it one of 2001's biggest hits, grossing $450 million worldwide, proving that historical accuracy doesn't matter when you have Hollywood stars and massive budgets. The real tragedy is that Pearl Harbor deserved better than this glorified action flick masquerading as drama. Number 2. Midway 2019. Roland Emmerich's Midway is what happens when a director prioritizes computer graphics over genuine storytelling. Veterans criticized the film for making one of World War II's most pivotal battles feel like a video game with unnecessary slow-motion sequences that drain the tension completely dry. The script was painfully predictable, hitting every cliché in the war movie handbook without adding any new perspective or insight. The acting felt wooden, the dialogue clunky, and the character development non-existent. What really bothered military historians and actual Navy veterans was how the film simplified the complexity of naval warfare into arcade-style explosions and hero moments that didn't happen. Real pilots who flew at Midway would have recognized immediately that the film got the mechanics of carrier combat completely wrong. The budget of $139 million should have resulted in something transcendent, but instead it produced a soulless spectacle that treated the deaths of over 3,000 sailors like points on a scoreboard. One retired commander said it felt like watching a historical event turned into a theme park ride. The cinematography was glossy and expensive, but glossy doesn't equal authentic. Audiences and critics both felt shortchanged because the potential was there. Squandered on melodrama and terrible pacing that made a 2-hour movie feel like 4 hours of your life you'd never get back. Number 3. Apocalypse Now Redux. 2001. Francis Ford Coppola's Vietnam epic is technically brilliant but morally compromised according to actual combat veterans who lived through that war. The film treats Vietnam like a mystical journey into madness, rather than a brutal conflict where real people died while Coppola indulged in avant-garde filmmaking techniques that prioritize visual poetry over historical honesty. Veterans criticized how the movie made their suffering look like an abstract art film. The famous "I love the smell of napalm in the morning" speech was meant to be ironic but became iconic, turning war crimes into quotable moments that trivialized the actual destruction visited upon Vietnamese people and American soldiers. The added Redux footage just made a problematic film even longer without addressing fundamental issues. Coppola's self-indulgence during production, documented extensively, showed a director more concerned with personal artistic expression than respectful storytelling. The film bankrupted companies, nearly killed cast members, and created chaos behind the scenes that infected every frame with instability and carelessness. Vietnam vets watched this and felt erased, turned into background characters in Marlon Brando's fever dream about mortality and ambition. The cinematography won praise, but the substance rang hollow. Critics loved the ambition, but veterans recognized the arrogance. The budget spiraled completely out of control to $31 million, making it one of the most expensive films ever made at that time. The worst part is that the film's reputation has somehow grown despite its fundamental disrespect toward the actual Vietnam War and those who survived it. Number 4. Windtalkers. 2002 John Woo's film about Navajo code talkers sounds incredible in concept, but the execution was catastrophically bad. The movie focused entirely on white Marine escorts protecting the Navajo soldiers, which completely missed the entire point of the actual story. Real Navajo code talkers and their descendants were infuriated because the film treated them like supporting characters in their own story. The action sequences were bombastic and ridiculous, featuring impossible stunts that made combat look like a cartoon rather than the terrifying reality these men experienced. Woo prioritized style over substance so completely that the actual historical significance got buried under slow-motion shots and melodramatic music. The dialogue tried so hard to sound tough that it came across as laughable instead. Critics panned it, veterans condemned it, and audiences stayed away in droves. Box office numbers showed the film earned only $58 million worldwide against a $120 million budget, a massive failure that proved even spectacular action can't save a fundamentally hollow movie. The worst part was that the real Navajo code talkers spent decades fighting for recognition, and when Hollywood finally decided to tell their story, they got this disrespectful garbage instead. Military consultants working on set reportedly quit in frustration because their input was constantly ignored. The film treated serious historical figures like action movie props instead of honoring their incredible bravery and sacrifice during the Pacific War. Number 5. The Patriot 2000. Mel Gibson's Revolutionary War epic became infamous for its grotesque historical inaccuracies and its glorification of violence in ways that made even action film fans uncomfortable. Veterans of actual combat criticized how unrealistically the film portrayed wounds, tactics, and the actual experience of battle. The movie showed musket fire with the accuracy of modern rifles, battle formations that made no tactical sense, and hand-to-hand combat that looked choreographed like a kung fu film rather than the chaotic desperation of 18th century warfare. Gibson's character commits war crimes throughout the film that the narrative frames as justified heroism, a troubling message that actual soldiers found deeply offensive. The film made $310 million worldwide, proving that historical accuracy doesn't matter as long as you have a famous actor and patriotic messaging. What bothered military historians most was the film's casual treatment of genuine brutality. Gibson's character massacres surrendering soldiers and burns people alive, actions the film presents without moral consequence. Real combat vets recognized that the film was essentially propaganda disguised as entertainment. The dialogue was awkward, the pacing dragged despite the runtime, and the emotional beats felt manufactured rather than earned. Critics initially praised it because it came out during a surge in patriotic filmmaking, but veterans and historians have spent 20 years tearing apart its complete disregard for historical truth. The movie demonstrates that spectacular cinematography and a big budget can distract audiences from fundamental storytelling failures. Number 6. Stealth 2005. Rob Cohen's military action film was so aggressively stupid that even casual movie fans rejected it immediately. Veterans couldn't get past the opening sequence where an unmanned stealth fighter apparently develops artificial intelligence and becomes sentient, something that made zero sense technically and insulted the intelligence of anyone who actually served in military aviation. The film treated serious military operations like a video game where consequences didn't matter, and explosions solved every problem. The acting was terrible, the dialogue cringeworthy, and the plot so nonsensical that reviews compared it to watching someone else play a video game for 2 hours. One test screening reportedly had a veteran walk out and loudly complain that this wasn't how military operations actually worked. The budget of $135 million produced a catastrophic box office failure, earning only $76 million worldwide, one of 2005's biggest financial disasters. Every military consultant involved with the production probably cringed watching their inputs get ignored in favor of more explosions and less reality. The film treated the military like a playground for special effects, rather than a serious institution making life and death decisions. Veterans criticized the film for making their real experiences look cartoonish by comparison. The movie became a cultural punchline, a symbol of Hollywood's complete inability to portray military life with any authenticity or respect. Worse, It suggested that actual soldiers might appreciate this kind of ridiculous fantasy, which was fundamentally insulting. Number 7. Hamburger Hill, 1987. John Irvin's Hamburger Hill is the kind of war movie that doesn't glorify a single thing about combat. The film follows a platoon tasked with taking Hill 937 from heavily entrenched North Vietnamese forces during the brutal 1969 battle. What makes this extraordinary is its unflinching commitment to showing warfare as absolute pointlessness. The soldiers capture the hill only to discover command plans to abandon it within weeks, making every death completely meaningless. Anthony Quinn and Don James deliver powerhouse performances as officers grappling with orders that contradict every principle they hold dear. The film cost $7 million and earned only $4.8 million back, a crushing box office failure that proved audiences weren't ready for this level of moral ambiguity. Military officials absolutely hated how the film showed American soldiers committing what could legally be classified as war crimes, then questioning whether following orders absolves them of responsibility. That complexity made generals furious. Number 8. Dragon Squad, 2005. Chinese action film tried desperately to capitalize on war movie appeal, while completely misunderstanding what made actual combat stories meaningful. The film featured impossible action sequences that had no connection to reality, characters who made catastrophically stupid tactical decisions, and dialogue that felt like it was written by someone who had never heard actual soldiers speak. Veterans from multiple countries watched this film and felt insulted because the filmmakers clearly had zero respect for the source material or the people they were portraying. The pacing was nightmarish, the editing made action sequences confusing rather than exciting, and the emotional core was completely absent. The film tried so hard to be cool that it forgot to be competent. Box office numbers showed audiences rejected it immediately, earning only modest international numbers against its production budget. Military consultants should have walked away from this project after reading the script because nothing about it worked on any level. The film demonstrates that spectacle without substance, action without consequence, and violence without meaning creates entertainment that even audiences looking for escapism will reject. Number 9. G.I. Joe: Rise of Cobra, 2009. Stephen Sommers' adaptation turned military concepts into absurd superhero nonsense that made combat veterans physically cringe. The film featured soldiers with impossible combat abilities, equipment that violated every law of physics, and tactics so ridiculous that actual military strategists couldn't stop pointing out flaws in every scene. Real soldiers, who hoped the film might honor their experiences, felt devastated watching their profession turned into cartoon material. The action sequences prioritized cool-looking over realistic, with characters surviving explosions and falls that would kill normal humans instantly. The dialogue was painfully bad, the plot incomprehensible, and the character development non-existent. The budget of $175 million somehow produced something that looked cheap, despite the financial resources available. Critics hated it, audiences mocked it, and veterans actively discouraged people from watching it. The sequel was somehow worse, suggesting that the filmmakers learned nothing from the widespread rejection. Military consultants on the project probably spent their entire time explaining why basic concepts didn't work and got completely ignored. The film proved that intellectual property recognition doesn't guarantee quality, and that throwing money at a project doesn't compensate for a fundamentally terrible concept. Number 10. Transformers: War for Cybertron, 2020. Michael Bay returned to making military-adjacent content and somehow managed to be even worse than his previous attempts at authentic war storytelling. The animated film featured action so chaotic that viewers couldn't follow what was happening, explosions so excessive that they became numbing rather than exciting, and a plot so convoluted that even dedicated fans of the franchise got lost. Military consultants watching this film would recognize that absolutely zero actual combat principles influence the choreography. Real soldiers criticize action films constantly, but this movie earned special contempt because it treated warfare like pure spectacle without consequence. The animation was expensive, but the direction was incompetent, creating beautiful-looking sequences that made no sense tactically. Veterans pointed out that the film glamorized destruction in ways that trivialized actual warfare. Number 11, Valkyrie, 2008. Bryan Singer's film about the plot to assassinate Hitler had every ingredient for success but failed spectacularly through incompetent direction and bizarre casting choices. Tom Cruise stars as Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, a German officer leading the resistance, and his presence immediately undermines the entire film because audiences couldn't take the plot seriously watching an American action star pretend to be a German aristocrat. The film treated one of history's most courageous acts like a heist movie, complete with tense music stings and dramatic pauses that made the story feel artificial and manipulative. Veterans and historians criticized how the movie simplified complex moral decisions into good versus evil when the reality was far more complicated. The cinematography looked like sterile production design rather than authentic recreation of Nazi Germany. German consultants complained that the script got basic cultural details wrong while pushing American values onto historical characters. The budget of $75 million should have resulted in something extraordinary, but instead created a hollow spectacle that looked expensive without feeling meaningful. Box office returns of $83 million worldwide represented a disappointing underperformance for a major studio release. Real soldiers criticized how the film made assassination conspiracies look cinematic rather than desperate acts of moral courage by men facing certain death. The dramatic tension felt manufactured because audiences knew the historical outcome, leaving nothing but bad acting and worse direction to carry the narrative. Number 12. The Lost Battalion. 2001. Ron Maxwell attempted to recreate a true story of isolated soldiers during World War I, but completely botched the execution through terrible casting and incompetent direction. The film featured actors who looked nothing like soldiers, spoke their lines like they were reading from cue cards, and moved through battle scenes with complete lack of understanding about how humans actually respond to combat. Veterans of modern warfare watching this historical film recognized that the emotional beats were fake, the tactical decisions nonsensical, and the stakes never felt real. The budget was supposedly substantial but looked cheap on screen, with battle sequences that appeared filmed in a parking lot rather than authentic trenches. The cinematography was ugly, the editing choppy, and the pacing so off that scenes dragged despite having minutes of runtime. Historical consultants working on the project must have been devastated watching their expertise get ignored. The film bombed commercially and critically because it failed on every technical level. What infuriates veterans most is that the actual Lost Battalion story is genuinely incredible, deserving far better than this incompetent adaptation that treated real American soldiers like props for a failed passion project. These 12 films represent Hollywood's fundamental failure to respect military experience and historical accuracy. Veterans have watched for decades as their stories got turned into action movie fodder, romance subplots, and technical spectacle that missed every emotional beat. The worst part is that genuinely incredible war films exist, proving that respectful storytelling and authentic drama work better than explosions and fake heroics. Here's the real question that should spark debate in your comments. Should Hollywood even be allowed to make war movies if they refuse to consult seriously with actual veterans and historians? Or is entertainment always going to prioritize spectacle over truth? Tell us which of these terrible films you've suffered through and what war movies actually respected the material. Which film on this list makes you angriest as a movie fan?